Okay, year 13, 5-minute revision fest, and this one is on a comparison question on the committees in the US Congress being more effective than the committees in the UK Parliament. Why is the question being asked? Well, we know that committees in the US Congress are traditionally seen as being quite significant bodies, both in legislation and scrutiny, but we have to acknowledge the fact that committees in the UK Parliament have been reformed more recently, and perhaps they're starting to challenge the US Congress in terms of their effectiveness. Let's look at the ways in which we can discuss this. First one area committees in the US can be argued to be more effective in terms of legislation. Here we're talking about US standing committees, their permanence and their expertise, utilising hearings as a means of really dictating the nature of the bill's content and also potentially influencing the passage and its completion. Good to mention here the House Rules Committee and the Joint Conference Committee when you're talking about their relevance to the passage of legislation. You compare that in significant contrast to the UK Public Bills Committee. One part of the process that it goes on in a piece of legislation, ad hoc, so temporary for a piece of legislation, lacking that level of expertise potentially, amendments being easily overruled by the government majority, and actually restricted in level of scrutiny by the guillotine motion. Most recent Brexit trade agreement and poll tax in the past being good examples of how limited committees can be in their passage of legislation in the UK. Second one, another way to look at it, scrutiny over executive actions. US standing committees, as we've mentioned before, have expertise, can choose their own investigations, most significantly have resources, time, prestige, and media interest in their work. Added to this, we know there are select committees that can be set up ad hoc for special investigations such as Benghazi, which implies that the US standing committees are particularly effective in challenging the government. However, the counter-argument to this would be sometimes the partisan nature can mean that when the presidents of the other party, they're much more focused, when the presidents of their own party, less willing to. And this was certainly seen during George W. Bush's reign. If we look at the UK, here we have some similarities. We have UK select committees doing their job of investigating departments, growing in expertise, being able to choose their own investigations. Over time, their prestige has increased, and media interest has also been more relevant to select committee work and their reports. Many would argue they lack the same resources as you see in the US. What's significant is if there's a major issue, it's more likely to be a judicial inquiry which is set in place rather than a parliamentary committee. This was certainly the case in the weapons of mass destruction over Iraq. So maybe we could argue that the UK is less partisan. The secret ballot appointments of chairs is maybe a sign of this. And you could argue that the House of Lords has a broader investigative role within scrutiny, such as science and technology, or in previous times, European Union legislation. However, you would have to say this is more of a similarity than perhaps the first. Let's get into the third one. And now we're looking at executive appointments. Now, as we know, the US Senate Standing Committee is significant in appointments because not only does it ratify appointments to the judiciary, the Supreme Court, there's some really good examples of that, but as we can see with Biden at this present time, they're significant in presidential choices for cabinet positions. Again, you could counter this by talking about effectiveness being challenged by partisanship. Certainly the case when you consider some of the more recent examples in regards to presidential nomination for the Supreme Court. Over here, well, we compare it and the contrast is stark. No committee role in UK executive appointments. The Prime Minister enjoying royal prerogative powers over their hiring and fire of anyone within their cabinet, and being influential perhaps in Lords appointments where the commission-based appointments exist, but we know that in recent cases Johnson's been criticised for the people he's put into there, and the Supreme Court also not being overseen necessarily by the Parliament. Now you could counter this by saying a body such as the Liaison Committee has emerged over time and may be able to challenge the Prime Minister, but not in actual choices of who's in his cabinet, maybe just in the work that his cabinet are doing. Therefore, we look at the question overall. The committee in the US Congress more effective? Certainly you've got some criteria here. You want to acknowledge the fact that committees in the UK have emerged as more significant over time, but look at the power that the standing committees exist in both the Senate and also in terms of legislation. That's probably going to be the key to your judgment. All right, there you go. Well done.